All right, thanks, Zane. Welcome all. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're located, I suppose. So thank you for joining us, taking the time. So we did a kickoff yesterday on Pattern 2.0 focused on refractories. Today, we're going to do our kickoff for our other project call, which is focused on 17.4 pH stainless steel. This project call is a little more prescriptive. I'll get into that in a minute, but one of the big elements of it is artificial intelligence, incorporation of artificial intelligence for material allowables and additive manufacturing, calling it AIM-4AM. So a little bit of the background for the scope of this project. In case you're wondering, since it is, it's a little more prescriptive than usual. So this is a need that was identified within the DoD's JAMWIG, the Joint Additive Manufacturing Working Group, and 17.4 pH has been talked about for quite a while. I think Army's been doing a lot of stuff with it. We've had some meetings. Some of you guys might have been involved with some presentations that were maybe a year or so ago back. So it's been in the works for a while. And then talking about incorporation of AI to help with the material allowables for this is another element, but this is a specific material that has had a lot of interest within the DoD for some time. So, as most of you are probably aware, generating a high pedigree, high quality, statistically based material data set similar to MMPDS, which a lot of us refer to as material allowables, it could be very time consuming, requires a lot of testing, and it could be very costly. And that's even if you do everything correctly with no mistakes, which sometimes are hard to avoid, especially when heat treatment's involved. So mistakes can be made by vendors or, communication on number of tests per build and orientations. There's a lot of things to consider, and a lot of mistakes that could be made when trying to generate these data sets. So it's a big undertaking to do this, and AI, utilizing different AI tools and methods is seen as a really good opportunity area, um, to build out these allowable data sets, but a lot quicker and cheaper. But we need to be very cautious and, I guess I'll say, pragmatic in doing so and developing the framework for doing this, so we don't trick ourselves. So, one of the big focuses for this program you can see mentioned here is, and this will be mentioned uh, multiple times, and it's in the RFP, but I want to make special emphasis of it, is it's not just about cost and time reduction. That is a major benefit and motive of doing this, but making sure that the AI driven methodologies are going to be able to predict risk associated with reduced material testing. Essentially, that the AI model is going to be able to predict risk, quantify risk. I guess think of it as has some sort of conscience, maybe a semblance of what are we doing here when we're cutting back the required amounts of tests, and still saying that we are going to have a material allowable that we're going to stand by and trust. Really understanding that associated risk with doing that within the AI model and learning more about that as well. That's a big emphasis, and I think that's going to be for to leverage this work moving forward as a foundation to do this with other materials. So, looking at the objectives specifically, what we're looking to do is utilize AI to reduce the burden of producing material allowables, along the way identifying, quantifying the risks associated with doing so with a reduced testing plan. And this will be specifically for 17.4 pH stainless steel in the H1025 heat treated condition. And this will be produced using laser powder bed fusion. So like I said, a little more prescriptive than some of our other project calls, but I think what's probably a bigger thing to look at, almost kind of backwards maybe a little bit, but it's the AI approach that's more open-ended. Probably a lot of people are going to leverage machine learning, I would imagine, but we want to see what's out there, what people are doing, what the capabilities look like, and not so much, so we got to control for certain things. In this case, it's going to be the material, heat treated condition, the modality, the printing used, um, and then have more flexibility on that AI approach and how that could help reduce the burden on allowables generation. So reduction in testing, and this is going to be associated with things like probability, and then, like I mentioned before, associated risk. So some of the main impacts that were specifically stated from the DoD. So reduce the number of tests, big, pretty much, that's the whole entire point is the testing burden required to build out these allowable data sets. So what does it look like if we're going to leverage AI and we're going to start to do this? How much can we reduce the tests, and how's that going to affect the confidence associated with that data set, and basically kind of trailblazing or setting a path of how are we going to do this moving forward, to the point where it can be leveraged. So except the point, accelerating the qualification and certification process for AM materials. So obviously this is, not really meant to be some daring experiment where maybe it works for this project, but then nobody knows if it would work for another type of material or another type of heat treatment or another type of printing modality. So like I mentioned before, laying the framework, building in a lot of confidence. I'd say probably approaches that are, more, I don't know what I would, less risky or, more conservative, even though we're using AI. But at the end of the day, the point is to accelerate the qualification and certification of AM materials for high performance applications, which is usually why you need to have these extensive data sets. So a lot of that involves trust. And so any modification or reduction in testing is, you're automatic inherently stepping into a territory that is going to be seen more risky. So how do we, I guess, keep everyone comfortable moving forward while utilizing AI? So, and I think a lot of that is going to go into understanding the AI model, and then, like I said, capturing that associated risk involved. So ROI, that's also, that kind of just rolls in with the reduced testing, reduced time. You're going to have cost savings is a big motivator. So this project call is specifically laid out in two phases. Phase 0, named for it's the foundational work that's going to go into this, and then phase 1. So a little bit about phase 0. So this is where a PCD, process control documentation, will be developed, and a preliminary qualification data set. So the preliminary qualification data set is going to be in accordance with the Air Force Flight Systems Bulletin ENFSB 2501, which is titled Preliminary Qualification Data Requirements for Metal Additive Manufacturing. And we do need to follow up with our DoD partners on getting this document. It's distro A. I don't know if it's hosted anywhere online, so we might have to somehow I don't know if we could put that on our website. We got to look into that. Um, for those of you that don't have the document, but just and at the end of the meeting, I could bring up a table they have in there, but just to give you an idea, it's similar to MMPDS S basis, but it's not as onerous in some regards as far as um, the number of tests required for some of the material properties, but it does cover a broader range. It includes things like 45-degree orientation, which isn't an MPDS, and then there's things in there with fatigue and other tests. Not a ton of them, but they're in there, and those aren't required in MPDSS basis. So it's similar but different. It's more focused towards um, well, I mean, MMPDS is to aerospace, but this is specifically Air Force's pre-qual they came out with last year, I believe. So just to give you an idea in case you've never seen it, but we could definitely make sure people have that. Um, Process control document. So remember, this is all like highly, I wouldn't even, it's like 100% geared towards qualification, certification efforts. So all work being done on this, it's going to need to be done on machines that are the installation qualification is done. I would say the process parameters and all that stuff is pretty nailed down already. Your operational qualification, but maybe having to redo some of that work to get it to a point where it's shareable for the consortium. But um, the process control document, we'd want that to be in alignment with standards such as SAE-AMS, the 7003 or AWS T20. Those were specifically mentioned from the DoD. So we want to make sure that the all the data and coupons and everything that's being done on this is following basically a procedure that you would do in a commercial space, as far as the printing goes. So your feedstock material, if there's I don't know if there's an existing standard for this or not right now at one of the SDOs. If there is, you'd want to be trying to be in line with that. Just like if you were, fulfilling an order for a customer that's requiring alignment with the standards. Testing as well, obviously. So all the testing is going to need to be done um, at accredited test labs, and that's going to have to be in alignment with testing standards, many of those being ASTM. So a lot of that is going to be more, I guess, if you want to think commercial grade as far as the material production, pretty mature. Whoever's doing the printing, um, uh, basically on like an industrial scale, very familiar with the material. And then the AI portion would overlay that. How do we utilize AI to not have to do as much work to produce an allowable data set? But this is going to be doing so it's not going to be um, literally doing that because there does need to be some validation verification, um, and that's going to be in the I guess I'll say the existence of additional tests, right? So maybe it won't be the full amount of tests that you would ordinarily do, but it would be more tests than you would ultimately want to do in combination with AI. And that's to bring extra validation and verification to this new approach. So phase zero, building out your PCD and then doing a prequal. And that's going to be in accordance with this Air Force Flight Systems Bulletin. Um, and then also in phase zero, the team is going to be required to establish a government advisory board to make sure that all the work that's being done is being done in a way that's going to be favorable to the DoD and probably specifically members within AFRL, but the government advisory board is going to be built out and identified with, so it's going to be done in coordination with the government program office of America Makes, and then also the team leads for the JAMWIG, which is under OSD ManTech. So they'll help coordinate and identify members for the government advisory board. The language we have there is proposers. I believe that's probably supposed to be like if you once you actually win the award. Um, Proposers are required though to include in their proposal to include a weapon system platform, DoD platform that's relevant for this, and then having that person on the team would help as well. But at least identifying where this material would be used to give a better idea of what your aim is as far as producing the material data set for what application and making sure all these things are in alignment and fold together and in alignment with the GAB. So if we look at technical approach for phase one, this is going to be using the process control document that was created in phase zero and leveraging that for phase one. So like I mentioned before, phase zero is more of like a foundation. Um, and it's the period of performance. We'll get into that in a minute for each of these, but it's relatively quick. So like I said, you probably want to make sure whoever you're partnering with or teaming with as far as executing the builds, probably gonna, you're gonna want to have your process and systems build out for the most part to even reach this point where you're in alignment with standards and producing a material that's industrially uh, in alignment with commercial needs and everything like that. So right here in phase one, leverage that pre-qual data using the PCD, making sure everything's consistent along the way with the production process. And what's going to be done in this phase is to produce further test results to validate what was done in phase zero, and then also conduct additional tests for things like high cycle fatigue, compression corrosion, which some of those will be done inherently through the pre-qual according to that flight systems bullet, and it's in their test plan matrix, but not, like I said, not a lot. Maybe like for instance, 3 samples for a couple builds or something. But this in this phase a little more. I don't know if you want to call it getting into a PQ phase, but maybe where you're trying to understand the material more, looking at things like a high cycle fatigue or corrosion. And then taking that AI model that was built in phase zero and refining that and trying to understand the risk associated with that model. And I guess the model being aware of the risk that's being introduced as well, and then also refining it to get a better understanding of reduction in tests required, and then expanding the AI model. So there's a sentence in here about enabling reduce further showing requirements for a part level qualification. So further showing, where I've seen it specifically is within like FAA, especially with additive manufacturing, is where they'll just to kind of give, I guess, a brief, probably oversimplified summary, but um, just to state what that means of maybe some of you that are not quite familiar is if they say follow, these standards and make sure you have a process control documentation and on and on and on, and especially for AM, where we're at right now, since it's newer than traditional manufacturing processes, is you do all these things, you're in accordance with all these standards and procedures and accreditations and different things, but it might require further showing, which means you need to do more work to instill further confidence in what you've done, especially if you're one of a few that are early um, early, wouldn't be adopters, but people utilizing this technology on a commercial scale, and it's going to be for parts that are going to be flying. So there's not really much of a track record. So that's what that means is, so looking at how the AI model can help reduce the need for further showing, um, that which ideally would be done in the initial phases of doing new stuff. So say if it was, and I think that's to leverage it once again for other material systems moving forward, because the same question is always going to come up for the people that are kind of trailblazing some of these things is, well, if this hasn't been widely done before, then how do we know it's going to work? Um, so how do we reduce the requirement for further showing by leveraging AI as well? And that's getting more into the part level qualification side. And yeah, develop a draft concept of operations for use of the AI framework. So that's kind of, you know, alluding to, if you want to think of it as a PCD for your AI framework, but the documentation of how this thing's actually working, how it's implemented, and that's for knowledge sharing, technology transfer, if you want to call it that. So it's not really transition, but transfer to other people. How can they use it? How can they leverage it? How can they understand it? Specifically for the AI framework, because that could, if it's not built out and documented properly, it could be kind of a mystery, which is what we don't want. So as clear as it could be made. And then the material data set, I think this is mentioned in another slide too, but make sure I hit it here. It's going to need to be in a format that's usable with Workbench for Additive Materials, which is called WAM. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a database. It's hosted and run by, I think both by NIAR, but it's a DoD initiative. So they're gathering material data sets and putting them in a um, data repository to leverage. And that's what they want to do with this material data set as well. And it'll, also be on America Makes Core. So this will be also incorporating principles and requirements according to MMPDS. So the idea too is, if you could kind of, I'll reiterate on some of the things we covered because there's a lot of pieces potentially, but you have the pre-qual flight systems bulletin out of the Air Force, and that's similar to MMPDSS basis, but there's some additions, a little nuances there. But then there's also MMPDS, which is a popular handbook that contains material allowables, especially for aerospace. And they have the CD basis, which is, higher level. You get into higher confidence, but that's where you get into your a lot of samples and testing and different lots and printers and uh a lot of stuff involved. And this is to aim towards that, to fit into that, reaching that MMPDS CD basis, is the idea. So if we look at material characterization and inspection, so they have a list of the tests that would be done in accordance with the flight system bulletin. So you could see there's your static properties, but then there's also the stress corrosion cracking, intergranular corrosion sensitivity, fatigue crack growth. Then you have your density and hardness, but there's some additional things in there. And that's for your pre-qual. So these won't be initially, well, some of them, a lot of samples, but looks like 20 or less for the most part. Some of them are a little higher, but some of them are a little more specific to maybe gearing towards an application more so than what the MMPSS basis would focus on, at least the required properties. And then mentioned here again, data sets will use a format template provided by DoD. So the team will be provided a template by the DoD to allow inclusion in the WAM database, or the Workbench for Additive Materials. So if we look at funding, topic, awards, period of performance. So one topic, one award's expected, and it's $2 million. cost share 50%, and the period of performance total is going to be 18 months for the technical, 3 months for the final reporting. I don't know if we have in here for pop 1 and pop 2. Let me just verbally say it's all in the RFP, but just to mention it real quick since I touched on it before with the phase 0 going relatively quickly. I think we should have it in here. I think it's 9 months. Find it real quick. I don't know. We'll get back to it. But yeah, I think phase 0 of those is 9 months, if I recall correctly. So here's the schedule for the RFP and the funding call. So project announcement posting was last week. Questions open, and those are going to be due to 10 to receive, and then we're going to get the responses back a week after that on the 17th. And then we have some other dates here for membership and deadlines for agreements and different things like that. One of the big dates, keep in mind, is the proposal due date. Submission date is 3/25 March. And then we're looking to get the decisions and notification out to proposal team, the awards, at least announced to them internally, end of April on 4/28 is the schedule for this. So if we look at eligibility requirements, the lead proposer needs to be a current member of America Makes and in good standing, paid in full by March 11th. And then project team members are not required to be America Makes members, but are highly encouraged to do so. And depending on the project, just to be aware of, any non-America Makes members contributing the proposed effort execution are not permitted to participate in project team discussions until completing a fully executed America Makes membership agreement. So there's a lot of benefit you can get out of being a team member a lot of times by hearing what other people are working on and being involved in the meetings and everything. So if you're not a member, then you would miss out on that. Information on how to join, eligibility. For this yesterday's project, we had a little tighter eligibility requirements. This one's more standard. So the eligibility requirements listed here. So any foreign nationals conducting work on the project should be outlined within the proposed technical approach. So main thing is you want to make sure that you clearly communicate any foreign nationals that are going to be doing work on this project as soon as you can. So that has to all be run through DOD, and they have to verify and check that all that's going to be okay. And the sooner the better that we know about that. And then a list of countries that are restricted from working on this project. So deliverables and reporting details. So you can find those on these pages. So the deliverables start on page 12, and then reporting requirements start on page 26 of the RFP. Evaluation criteria. We changed the format a little bit. You can see data management we rolled that up into another category. You can see the percentage breakdown. Technical approach and methodology is 40%. And then tech dissemination, impact to DoD is 25%. Program management approach is 30%, which is also going to entail, parts of your data management, which specifically for this project is going to be very important. And then cost 5%. So I know yesterday, Cole, I don't know if you wanted to hop on again and give a quick statement on the evaluation criteria.
Yeah, John. So real quick, everybody, if you've submitted one of our project calls in the past year and a half, please be aware that yes, we do have updated evaluation criteria. This is determined with the government as well as based on feedback from the government and our membership. So please go in, take a look at this criteria. Some criteria has been eliminated, new ones have been added, been rolled up with others. So cannot stress enough, please go and look at page 24 of the RFP for this criteria. Just so everybody knows, the criteria from that page is copied directly verbatim onto the scorecard that we give to our project reviewers. That's all, John. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Cole. Yeah, so evaluation criteria reduced, but it also means that not certain things, the things that are listed will be, higher point count. So pay close attention. And then the criteria under technical approach, there's some project specific ones in there. Keep an eye out for. That's listed in the RFP. You'll see them. They're specific to AI and material allowable generation. So we want to have a good understanding of the proposer's competence in, or the team competence in the world of printing this material in accordance with existing standards and familiar with all the qualification processes for material and process, the printing process itself, but also MMPDS, allowables, just a lot. It's a lot of, for those of you that know a lot about it, a lot of information that's hard to learn very quickly. So definitely want to emphasize knowledge and background in that on the team, and then also AI, how you're going to leverage it, and how that's going to be clearly communicated to the AM community as far as like what approaches are being made or being used, being proposed, and I guess trying to clearly communicate that to an audience that's probably not going to be experts in AI per se. So here's a slide on the proposal and contracting information. Fee allowed. Make sure your cover page has the UEI and cage on it. And then a little information on subrecipient agreements and the like. So the last two slides are on our teaming platform. I'd go over this, but Zane, I don't know if you wanted to talk about it or if you just wanted me to cover it real quick.
Zane had to step away, but no, if you're familiar with this from past project calls, it's remained unchanged. So you're able to go in there on the project call that you're interested in, and you can basically submit a form either expressing interest as a team lead or a team member. We collect this information and we can get people connected as needed.
Thanks, Cole. Yeah, so you could see on these slides, there's information on how to use. So if you go to any of our project call web pages now, there's going to be this pop up. I don't know if I'd consider it a pop up. It's just there, I think, but it's a button that you use. It says team up, so it's I guess we could call it a pop up that's just already popped up, but it's interested in teaming, and then you click on that button. It's run through the member portal. You could set it up, but you put in things like your contact information, types of partners you're seeking, role in the project. So we're trying to make sure we communicate this out to everyone because this has come up a lot in the past. Zane led this, putting this together, and we think it's going to be a really good tool if people utilize it appropriately. So basically it's especially for a project like this, if you're trying to connect, say you have elements of the AM side and the material allowable side, but not maybe the AI or vice versa, or, some of these projects get a little diverse on some of the talents of the team, and this tool can be especially useful for that. And let's see, the next slide just has more details, getting into the member portal and how to use it, the teaming submissions, and think they stay in there and you can update them, and they're associated with certain project calls. So it's a little um, information on our teaming tool, and that is it for the presentation. So now we can move on to the questions.
Yeah, John, we have two questions under the Q&A currently. So starting with like Lula's question. So I believe this was slide 4. At the bottom, it said, you know, we plan to train AI models using material data generated. Would data generated under this research of this program be adequate to train the AI models?
Let me read that again. Um, yes, I believe so. I don't know if that's kind of alluding to using additional data that's been generated for this material and process to feed into the AI model, or just only information generated on this project. But yeah, I think the idea is to train the AI models for this project based off data that was generated off this project. So it wouldn't be a massive amount of information, I guess. I don't know if that fully answered the question.
Like Lula, if you need more clarification, at the end of this, I'll be posting the email address for our project co-email, where we'll be collecting questions after this. You're welcome to provide a more detailed write-up in your question and send it to that.
Thanks.
We have John asking, are parts to be fabricated on this program?
That is an interesting question that I was kind of wondering myself. So we will have to go back to our DoD partners and ask, because it does allude to that. But when I go through the details, like a part or artifact isn't part of the deliverables, but they do want an understanding of produce further showing for part qualification. So one would think you would need to test some parts out. Let me go back to that. So that's, yeah, we're gonna have to get clarification on that one. And if so, to what, to what degree, because that could really affect the budget. Um, so it's a good question, John. Yeah, expand AI model to enable reduce further showing requirements for a part level qualification, perform testing to validate the risk acceptance framework. We're gonna have to get, what I was wondering that too. Is that like part level testing, or is that, what does that look like? So we'll get further clarification on that.
Okay, Yash has asked, are we required to deliver a white box solution where all source code, weights, and training pipelines are open and audit ready for the DoD, or is a proprietary black box executable acceptable?
I'm gonna go ahead and we'll get a final answer on that, but I'm pretty sure that the black box is not what they're looking for, and it would be, I guess, the white box version. Although that could probably be pretty extensive as far as the details and data provided with that. So yeah, we'll get back with our DoD partners and get a better idea exactly of what they're looking for. But in the meantime, yeah, I don't think a black box solution is going to be something that would be acceptable.
Right. Haojun is asking, the required tests seem not to match the proposed timeline and budget. So are we requiring all of the tests that are listed in this project call?
Yeah, so for the pre-qual, they want that for sure. And I agree. I mean, see here, it's a decent amount of tests. But I think if you have your IQ, your OQ, you're familiar with how to print this, you already have your process developed. If you don't have a PCD already, you're pretty close to one, already following standards. Um, Most of the costs would be put into printing coupons, getting them tested, um, and then building out the AI model. So I think to print and test for a pre-qual is not going to cost anywhere near $2 million. If you did like a CD basis, then you would, but um, nevertheless, it's still a lot of work. But yeah, that that pre-qual flight systems bulletin, they do want that done, and then some additional tests on top of that. So yeah, it is. I mean, it's a lot of testing. I think the expectation is that a lot of work for the phase zero um, is already going to be pretty well handled and understood. I think that's one reason why so I checked on the proposal or the RFP, it's 6 months technical period of performance for phase zero. Um, so I mean, if it were me, I would want either myself or somebody on my project team to have already basically done phase zero and like at some point in the past. And they're very familiar with this material printing process, heat treat. You know your vendors, you know where you're getting your material from. Um, and you would just want to validate that you know that basically and generate the information for phase zero and then focus on phase one. Um, so for the selected alloy 17.4 pH, is there a specific reason it was chosen? It does not appear to be a critical component material. Um, so this one I don't know. Well, the only thing I know about the background of why it was chosen, because I was kind of thinking the same thing, but um, it's viewed as a utility alloy because it's precipitation hardenable. It's has versatility. I mean, there's some other ones that are like 15 whatever for stainless steel or and there's some other ones, but that one was identified as having potentially a lot of utility, meaning a lot of different stakeholders within the DoD could potentially benefit from this material. And then if they could start to leverage it using AM, um, then maybe using it in other applications that it's not currently used now because it's not cost effective. But if you could print it and get good at printing it and do that in a cost effective manner, then you could start using this material in other applications that maybe would be um, for more critical components is from what I've gathered, the discussions over this has been going on for a while, but the last year or so. Um, so for the selected alloy 17.4 pH, several of the proposed tests, such as tensile testing, already have existing reference data. Could we select tests that already have established references so that results can be compared later? For example, MPDS includes critical tensile data for this alloy produced by AM. I don't know. We'll have to get back on that. I'm not aware of 17.4 pH though in the MMPDS Volume 2 handbook. But if there is published data on this somewhere, that probably would be considered, but we want to verify that with our DoD partners. Okay, is that everything?
Yeah, does anybody have any additional questions? Like I said, I'll be posting very soon the project goal email. So if a question comes to you after this webinar, please email it to that address. We'll collect it and it'll be part of the ones we post on the posting date. Oh, good question, Michael. Will CMMC be required for data security? And how does the use of AI impact the data control?
Yeah, so excellent question, Michael. We're talking a little bit about that during one of our working group calls, and super great question. And we want to make sure everybody on the call is kind of aware of that. And we're gonna have to reach out to DoD and see what they have on that. And basically, what what that involves is you have all this information, all this data, and then you're feeding it into an AI model, and that's leveraging hardware, software, and who's your partner utilizing that information, and so how walled off does all this have to be? I think the idea is with this project is like most, I think the goal is to make it distro A. At the end of the day, it's going to be run as a distro C while the project's ongoing. But yeah, that's a really good thing to bring up, and we're gonna get with our DoD partners to get some feedback on that and more direction, because that could definitely bring some associated costs with it and some hurdles as well, I think, from a time perspective. So doesn't look like there's any more questions that I could see in the chat. So we want to make sure that we got everyone's question in the chat. It looks like we did. And if there's no further questions, then that's all I have on my end.
Yep, I just posted the project goal email in the chat. So if anybody thinks of questions later, please use that email address. It goes directly to me. We'll get the questions collected. If they're quick programmatic questions, we'll be able to answer that just right on the fly. Any technical questions, we'll have to wait to that posting date. So yes, thank you, everybody. And we're looking forward to receiving your responses for this project call. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.